CIA headquarters are located in Langley, Virginia, 15 miles outside Washington, D.C. 16,000 people work inside this fortress. The CIA is not required to reveal its budget, organization chart, key figures, number of employees and salaries, or even their names and job descriptions. Its overall budget is rumored to reach wild figures. We do know that the CIA staff has grown from 35 at the agency's inception to 100,000 at present. Its budget has jumped from several $1,000s to $28 billion. The CIA is in charge of counter-espionage efforts outside the country, but is not allowed to operate on American soil, a domain still reserved to the FBI. Truman made the CIA directly responsible to the President of the United States. But the agency soon slipped out of his grasp, becoming the only service authorized to carry out special covert actions and subversive operations abroad. When the CIA was created, it was given a clear task: gathering, correlating, coordinating and analyzing intelligence, and intervening only when diplomatic efforts failed and military action was not recommended.
The CIA was a creation of the Cold War. It had one function, and one function only. It was supposed to only have one, and that was to determine when, how, and where the Soviet Union was going to attack the United States, or if. That's all it was set up for. It was set up after Pearl Harbor. After the failure, we were attacked. And our whole mission through the 50s and 60s, through the 70s, and through the 80s was to decide or to figure out what were the plans and intentions of the Politburo in Moscow.
We also made a fundamental error in that we chose early on to focus our spies on what we call hard targets. And so all of our intelligence has been focused on the Soviet Union.
CIA, the U.S. intelligence community as a whole, was spending somewhere between 55% and 60% of our resources on the Soviet Union.
That was our job, was to check them in the Third World, wherever it was, in Angola, in the Horn of Africa, in the Congo, in Afghanistan, in Iran. This was a constant silent war, if you will, that went on for decades.
That's the name of the game. I mean, our job was to find out what people were up to. And the best way to find that out is to penetrate some organization. Put somebody in there or defect somebody. And that's what name of the game, that's what we did.
We began our erroneous ways by importing as many Nazis as we could into the United States.
In 1943, future CIA head Allen Dulles flew to Switzerland to open secret negotiations with several Nazi leaders. Contact had already been made with General Reinhard Gehlen, head of Hitler's Secret Service, Otto von Boschwing, Eichmann's right-hand man, and Klaus Barbie. All these war criminals would be employed by the CIA at the close of the war. As a renowned Wall Street lawyer, Allen Dulles' biggest clients was the Standard Oil Group, one of only a handful of companies that kept on doing business with the Nazis during the war.
And therefore, America literally infected itself with Nazis immediately after World War II, because that was the price it was willing to pay for their brains. That was the first mistake. The second mistake over time has been to believe that we could interfere in the affairs of others and literally topple governments by putting our money and our influence behind selected groups.
In 1953, at the height of the Cold War, Allen Dulles is named Director of Central Intelligence. The number of special and secret operations grows steadily after Dulles takes over the CIA.
If you go back to 1947 and take it all the way through Guatemala, Hungary, Berlin, Vietnam, Chile, all the operations over the years, the same kind of behavior is repeated again and again and again.
The CIA has mounted a number of covert operations. One of the reasons the CIA went into covert operations was because it was something no one else was doing, and so there was no bureaucratic competition over it. They also went into these operations because the presidents found that they could use this tool secretly without having to explain to the American people what they were doing.
It's probably changed a fair amount over the years. If you were to go back to the Eisenhower period or even the early Kennedy period, there really was much more discipline and much more secrecy. And this, of course, these were the days when the CIA was really doing things like Iran, like Guatemala, and so forth. You didn't actually hear much in this country about those operations in those days because people didn't talk about them.
In May 1953, Allen Dulles draws up Operation Ajax, the first in a long string of coups organized entirely by the CIA. In Tehran, Iranian Prime Minister Mossadegh has decided to privatize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. British authorities launch an international embargo against Iran, plunging the country into chaos. But British and American oil companies deem the measure insufficient and flee Iran. They push the British Prime Minister to ask President Eisenhower to help them get rid of Mossadegh. Allen Dulles puts together an operation to oust Mossadegh and restore the young Shah to power. Shah Reza Pahlavi will rule the country until he in turn is ousted 25 years later.
It was not a big, super planned coup. It was a big, crazy thing that happened.
But you know who was behind that? It was British Petroleum. British Petroleum, the Prime Minister of Britain came to Eisenhower and said, there's a threat here of taking over the Iranian oil fields. We need it, just as you need Saudi Arabia. And so the Americans went along.
Macmillan was Prime Minister at the time, and he brought a lot of pressure to bear on Eisenhower, Americans, Allen Dulles, and so forth, to do something about the situation there.
When the British approached the Eisenhower administration, the argument that convinced Eisenhower to say yes was not that we'll give you some of the Iranian oil when it's over. It's that Mossadegh is losing power to the communists. And the Soviet Union is going to win Iran the way the communists won China. And you, President Eisenhower, don't want to be the president who has to answer the question, who lost Iran? There was a very formal procedure on the Mossadegh affair. This was an organized plan. Mossadegh is a bad leader. He's weak. The communists are strong. He's also irrational. The Shah's also weak. He's not going to do anything about it. We have to intervene to save the country from being taken over by the Soviets. Just that blunt.
Mossadegh was a communist, and I have no doubt he was. I thought it was a good idea. If we had not got rid of Mossadegh, you might have had a very different kind of government. Socialist, communist, God knows what.
We can't now let Iran fall, but at the same time, we're not going to fight a war like Korea in Iran. We're not prepared to do that. So the cheap way to do it is covert operations. CIA will be more active. And so Allen Dulles became the director of CIA with the mandate to be active. And he said the inexpensive way to be a great power is to topple governments with the CIA. So this was a huge success. That's why they thought, well, Guatemala and other places do it this way. You know, it's easier. And the question of whether it's moral or immoral.
In June 1954, Guatemala's new president, Jacobo Arbenz Guzman, decides to give the country's poorest farmers a few acres of land held by the United Fruit Company, an American multinational. He also creates a tax on exports. Guatemala is the Caribbean's leading producer of bananas and tropical fruits, the country's unique resource. But virtually all the nation's lands, its entire economy, is in the hands of United Fruit.
When Guatemala very reasonably wanted to tax the bananas, the United Fruit Company asked the U.S. government to go in and basically bankrupt Guatemala.
They were very close to people in the White House and the Pentagon and all over the government. They had an enormous influence over the U.S. government, and they were able to call for the overthrow of Arbenz.
They were leaning leftward toward communism, and that was something that we wanted to resist.
There were two things involved, United Fruit and communism. And Jacobo Arbenz came down on the wrong side of it.
A full-scale coup is drawn up during the meeting between President Eisenhower, Allen Dulles, and Dulles' brother, John Foster, head of the U.S. State Department. The Dulles brothers, who once ran Wall Street's leading law practice, now hold the two most important posts in the Eisenhower administration, Foreign Affairs and CIA Operations. Allen Dulles, head of the CIA, also sits on the board of United Fruit.
Two brothers One runs CIA, one runs the State Department, and their family law firm is involved with United Fruit in Central America.
Allen Dulles was running his own private CIA out of Wall Street, out of his offices at number 44 Wall Street. You got to understand something. It's spy business. It's about helping American business overseas.
Presidents found they could earn money from corporations by using the CIA as enforcers.
The CIA wrests power from Arbenz, replacing him with a military junta led by General Castillo Armas. The general's first move is to quash the land reform program, which threatens the financial interests of United Fruit and the United States.
It was probably one of the worst things the CIA or the US government has ever done.
The United States government and the CIA are responsible for genocide in Guatemala because they put in power people so as to avoid a small tax on bananas.
They put in place a military dictatorship which for the next 40 years or so killed hundreds of thousands of people in Guatemala.
Everybody likes to think that that was CIA that did a very delicate operation against Arbenz. Okay. Or that they did a very well-planned operation against Mossadegh. Those were two lucky things that happened.
The U.S. treats the world as if it was the Godfather. They're very arrogant in their foreign policy.
In 1960, Congo claims independence from Belgium. Leftist leader Patrice Lumumba becomes prime minister. The United States has its eye on the country's vast mineral resources. Lumumba will stay in office just 2 short months.
This was a terrible example to set for the rest of Africa. It was shocking. And he sealed his fate at that moment. He had to be overthrown.
There was a meeting about the 18th of August of 1960, and Eisenhower gave an indication that it would be nice to have Lumumba out of the way.
I was arguing inside the embassy that we could oust Lumumba as prime minister.
But Allen Dulles interpreted this National Security Council meeting that he was given carte blanche to undertake a plot against Lumumba, which they did.
There were instructions to try and do away with Lumumba, and the poison toothpaste was sent to Larry Devlin, the station chief, and he refused to deliver it.
Our officers were not about to get involved in an assassination.
So I was arguing for a political solution, but there were those, I guess, in Washington who felt that other measures were more appropriate.
Allen Dulles ordered Lumumba's assassination. In 1975, Congressional inquiry concluded that President Eisenhower had approved the operation. General Mobutu, who had seized power, had Lumumba shot in the head and dumped in a vat of acid. Frank Carlucci, future CIA Deputy Director, then U.S. Defense Secretary, was posted in Congo during the coup.
They accused me of being responsible for the assassination of Lumumba. It's all absurd, of course. The idea that a very junior Foreign Service officer would sanction the assassination of a prime minister is silly on the face of it.
He escaped from prison, and he was in hiding, and the CIA helped to find him, and then he was turned over to one of his main enemies in the Congo, and he was killed.
CIA was certainly a component in that. What you have to talk about is the way America was run in those days.
The CIA was asked to choose dictators and help them rule over the people.
There are certainly incidences, whether they're in Guatemala in the 50s or the Shah, or, early on, where people could argue that CIA involvement was wrong.
Well, whether it was right or wrong, that's a different matter. But that's what the CIA is for, to conduct clandestine operations.
There was an American belief or illusion back there in the 1950s at the time of the agency's involvement in Iran and subsequently in Central America, that the CIA could accomplish anything on the international scene. This mythology was encouraged by people in the agency.
And this gave the CIA an aura of power.
That was a problem that after a while they began to believe their own myth.
They kept their position. They kept their money. They kept their power by being able to tell the President of the United States one thing. In the end, if you're really in trouble, we can come in and overthrow the government. We can come in and replace the government. We can give you that power.
The biggest problem with that is a lot of people at CIA believed it. They believed they were that good. So this guy Castro, I mean, this ought to be easy enough.
We thought we could just treat Cuba like a banana republic. And Cuba turned out to be a little bit stronger and a little bit smarter than the American bureaucrats expected.
Y nuestra, de todos, de los revolucionarios, de los patriotas, será la misma suerte. Y de todos será la victoria.
In Cuba, after running dictator Batista out of the country, Fidel Castro nationalizes sugar plantations owned by American companies. Tensions immediately mount. The U.S. halts all loans to Cuba and breaks off diplomatic ties. Cuba strikes a trade agreement with the USSR. Castro defies Washington, openly courting Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev.
He was setting a very bad example for Latin America. I mean, the idea of this small island standing up to Washington and saying they will no longer be a client state, this was shocking.
The day Eisenhower handed over power to John Kennedy, he also gave him a file called the Bay of Pigs. The plot was hatched by Allen Dulles and Richard Nixon, Eisenhower's vice president and Kennedy's opponent in the 1960 presidential race. Kennedy inherited a plan drawn up by the CIA to invade Cuba and oust Castro by landing at the Bay of Pigs.
He approved it. He was looking for ideas, and one of the ideas he approved was the Bay of Pigs, but it turned out to be the Bay of Pigs.
Kennedy comes, just barely takes office. Goes through his inauguration. He's briefed on the Bay of Pigs. He doesn't like it, but he goes with it, and it turns out to be a disaster.
The CIA sent 1,500 inexperienced Cuban exiles on a suicide mission, hoping Kennedy would cave in and send American air power to back them up. But Kennedy refused, and the operation failed. The CIA laid the entire blame for the Bay of Pigs debacle on his shoulders.
The operation was a failure because it was badly run, period.
I think he went along with it because he didn't have any better ideas, and his staff didn't have any better ideas. So he kept on with what he had.
It was a poorly planned military operation, and the intelligence supporting it was not good.
The idea that a small group of people could come in and somehow they could overthrow a regime, I think, underestimated the popularity of Castro in a significant way.
They expected the Cubans to rally to our side, and they did not. And they just didn't have the right military plan and forces to do the job.
The CIA had said it could be done if the United States was willing to support the insurgents militarily. And at the last moment, the administration decided not to provide military support for the Bay of Pigs insurgents, and it failed.
We were angry about the Bay of Pigs because it failed and because we were really to a considerable degree responsible for the operation. But and there certainly would have been people who were irritated and angry at the president.
They hated Kennedy because he did not support the Bay of Pigs enough, in their opinion, especially with air power.
You can't say CIA liked or disliked something. It's got to be certain people or certain groups that might not have. And I'm sure there were people, case officers and division chiefs and other senior officers, who probably didn't like the president. And why not? He was doing things that they didn't like, so they didn't like him.
Just a month after taking over the White House, John Kennedy and younger brother Robert, U.S. Attorney General, give the CIA full power to get rid of Fidel Castro. Sam Halpern is put in charge of Operation Mongoose. Between the failed landing at the Bay of Pigs in 1961 and John Kennedy's assassination 2 years later, Castro escapes 8 assassination attempts, all organized by the CIA.
Kennedy asked for options on Cuba, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff actually proposed to kill Americans in a covert operation that would be made to appear to be a Cuban attack on U.S. soil as an excuse for going to war against Cuba. And this was properly refused.
The CIA at that time was trying to find ways to deal with Castro.
And whether it was 8 or 80 attempts to assassinate Castro or blow up his cigar or something like that.
I mean, ridiculous things. Been planting itching powder in his beard, you know. It was just, these were very feckless kinds of things they were thinking about in order to try to weaken his position.
I think there were 20 or 30 attempts against Castro.
I think 8 sounds a little better. I mean, 25, nobody's that lucky. I mean, somebody's, I mean, sooner or later. But, you know, Kennedy was obsessed with Castro, Robert Kennedy.
I'm not sure which one was the pusher more than anybody else. We dealt mostly with Bobby rather than with Jack.
John F. Kennedy knew about everything. Robert Kennedy knew about everything.
I could never figure it out what made them so anti-Cuba. The only thing I could think of was their own feelings, their own egotism. Here was a problem they couldn't solve, and they'd never run up against a problem they couldn't solve. They were always on top of everything, and this one they were not. And there was no way they were going to be on top of it. So everybody along the way, including the entire U.S. government, had to help them get over this problem.
John Kennedy is having a hard time keeping Allen Dulles and the CIA in line. The agency is fast becoming a state within the state. As each new attempt to oust Castro fails, Allen Dulles becomes increasingly intractable. He launches a propaganda campaign against Kennedy, blaming him for all the CIA's failures since the bungled Bay of Pigs operation.
And he's absolutely beside himself. He wishes he could tear the CIA down.
He was so angry, a month before he died, he said, I want to take the CIA and take it apart board by board and scatter it to the winds.
Did you ever see any pieces of CIA? I have never seen any pieces of CIA anywhere. CIA has never been smashed to pieces by anybody.
But the agency attempted to stay out of the limelight to a considerable extent.
It began under Kennedy. Bob McNamara was his agent for doing it. He decided to remove them and replace them with men of the left. That's what Kennedy did to the CIA. I watched it, I was there.
John Kennedy decides to curtail the CIA's power and get rid of its powerful chief, Allen Dulles, who is forced to resign. Kennedy, flanked by Dulles, names a discreet but effective little man named John McCone as new CIA director. Allen Dulles is furious about what he calls his firing. He embodied the CIA for 10 years. The agency was his creation. The day after John Kennedy was killed, his brother Bobby rushes to see new CIA Director John McCone with a single question. Did the CIA kill my brother?
The question came up after the assassination in November '63 of the president. Yes, Bobby Kennedy asked John McCone, is there anything there?
The brother's got a right to ask those questions. It's nothing unusual. Why shouldn't he? He should ask questions. He didn't know, and he wanted to be sure. And that's a human question for one man to ask, did you kill my brother? Why not?
McCone would never admit to that. No head of the CIA is going to admit that there was an involvement with the assassination of a president.
Why would a CIA chief want to kill a president? President fires him, then he hasn't got any. Then the guy doesn't have any tools anyway to kill a president. What would be the purpose? To show he didn't like the president? The president knows that by now.
New American President Lyndon Johnson charges the Warren Commission with getting to the bottom of the Kennedy assassination. Oddly enough, the investigation is handed to Allen Dulles, even though the two hated each other and Kennedy had stripped him of his post. Dulles has his visit to Dallas filmed. Charles Cabell, Dallas deputy director at the CIA and brother of the mayor of Dallas, assists in the investigation. A few months later, Judge Warren releases his conclusions in the presence of Lyndon Johnson. There was no assassination plot. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone.
Allen Dulles did his best to sabotage the Warren Commission, I think. If you don't want anything to come out of the commission, then it's not strange. You know, I think it was done on purpose.
My instructions to the CIA were to make all the information available. The CIA virtually emptied its files on the Kennedy assassination, and there was absolutely no evidence of any conspiracy, certainly no evidence that the CIA was ever involved. I couldn't imagine that the CIA would be involved in the assassination of a U.S. president. That's beyond the wildest imagination.
You know, people have made a cult out of this, what happened. I haven't seen anything to the contrary that I found persuasive.
The House of Representatives ran on a $6 million investigation. And just as I came to the FBI, they gave me a tape that was, the committee gave me a tape to suggest that there was a second shooter from the hill there, the knoll, the grassy knoll.
It was interesting because when I first came into the CIA, I found out of a Frenchman who was claimed to know about the Kennedy assassination. And I can't describe him any more than that, but he provided a lot of detail. And so I wanted to read it. I was curious, just curious. It was pure personal curiosity. So I asked for the file, and they told me it was very, very sensitive, and it was called what's black tape, that they put black tape around it and all these seals so no one can get it. So what I did was I waited for a Saturday when I was on duty and took a request to get the file, and only the director of operations or the director could read it. And I stuck it between a bunch of other requests, and I knew he was very busy. So I went to the director of operations office, put it on his desk, and he very quickly signed them all. So I got the permission to get this. I changed the address where it should go, and I sent it down to files. It was like 12 volumes. This is on the Kennedy assassination. And it came back, said, sorry, file lost. Disappeared.
I cannot tell you how many conspiracy theories I have dealt with over the decades. And the one thing I know is that conspiracy theories in Washington, D.C. don't hold water because nobody can keep a secret. And particularly for a long time, and particularly if there's a lot of money involved, if they could sell it to the newspapers or a journalist or something like that.
Nobody keeps secrets that well. I mean, there were thousands of people that had to keep the secret in the FBI and the CIA and the Army, the Pentagon, everybody, about killing Kennedy.
The reality is the Kennedy assassination is the greatest secret that America has. We don't really know what happened.
Several months after Kennedy's assassination, Lyndon Johnson begins reconsidering the late president's plans to withdraw American military advisors from Vietnam. He tells an impatient general to get him elected, then he can have his damn war.
We were very skeptical throughout much of the Vietnam War about the ability to essentially win a guerrilla war against the North, as long as the North was kept as a primary sanctuary.
In August 1964, the CIA fakes a North Vietnamese attack against an American warship in the Tonkin Gulf. This totally contrived attack gives Johnson the pretext he needs to increase the number of American soldiers in Southeast Asia tenfold and begin bombing North Vietnam.
The United States destroyer Maddox was attacked on the high seas in the Gulf of Tonkin. The attacks were deliberate. The attacks were unprovoked.
It was most likely a fake attack, or probably never happened at all. It could have been totally misunderstood by the people on the ship, thinking they were being attacked.
The captain of the ship sent in a message saying he had not seen anything and that he was now questioning all of his earlier messages, and that he believed there was a real possibility that he had been fighting a phantasma. The Pentagon and the presidency chose to ignore his last message, and they chose to use the Tonkin Gulf incident as an excuse for going to war.
That brought about a resolution which changed a lot of different things, for sure.
The determination of all Americans to carry out our full commitment to the people and to the government of South Vietnam will be redoubled by this outrage.
That was used as a pretext to escalate the war.
That incident was used as a justification for other action.
Now we know that it was a lie. At the time it happened, people were suspicious, but it was only later that their suspicions were confirmed. And it was shown very clearly that it was all a pretext, a phony story.
Inside Vietnam, Operation Phoenix begins coming together. The CIA is told to carry out a series of assassinations targeting civilians to paralyze the country. CIA experts teach special teams how to terrorize the population by killing teachers, doctors, and businessmen. Each assassination is signed. Every time a death squad strikes, a playing card, the ace of spades, is left in clear view on the body. Most of the victims are tortured before they're killed. William Colby, the CIA agent who headed up the operation, would become head of the CIA a few years later.
Operation Phoenix was an operation to destroy the Viet Cong structure. They wanted to eliminate anybody who had any connection whatsoever to the Viet Cong.
That was a covert operation which we were instructed to carry out in order to distract and hinder the North Vietnamese effort.
Bill Colby is associated with Phoenix, and those ended up killing a lot of Vietnamese people. Would I want to go and dig all that up again? Probably not.
It was, I think, run mostly by Bill. I mean, he organized it, I know. But the idea was as a protective device for our own operations, to protect their own operations.
Bill Colby assured me that it was a reasonably crisp and clean operation.
They just murdered anybody whom they thought had any connection to the Viet Cong. I'm speaking now not of soldiers, but I'm speaking of civilians. And so it was a pretty bloody massacre.
Strategic hamlets, rural pacification, all of these things generally fail in a revolutionary situation. That was part of a failed set of policies. And Lyndon Johnson gets absolutely buried in Vietnam.
I got a letter from LBJ and said this is your lucky day, time to put your khaki trousers on. We've got a job for you to do. Dean Rusk has caught the Asian flu and we are sending you to Vietnam.
In 4 years' time, U.S. ground troops in Vietnam swell from 20,000 to 540,000. A former Pentagon employee gave the New York Times a confidential file detailing the U.S. involvement in Vietnam and revealing the lies of the Johnson administration.
We invaded Cambodia, we bombed Cambodian targets, and the Pentagon actually created false books, false records, to show that we were bombing inside of Vietnam.
They mistook a civil war for a communist war and cost us 55,000 American lives in the process and 1 million Vietnamese lives.
The Americans violated the Geneva Accord, the Americans committed war crimes, and the American people didn't realize that war crimes were being committed in their name.
Very few people knew about all the terrible things that the CIA had done.
Operation Chaos, launched under Johnson and expanded under his successor Richard Nixon, targeted leftists and subversive elements said to be manipulated by foreign powers. The CIA had been spying on over 10,000 Americans for years, surveilling the moves and tapping the phones of teachers, students, journalists, and political leaders. special intelligence units broke into buildings, searched homes, and opened the mail of people whose only crime was disagreeing with government policy.
Not just the CIA, but all of the U.S. intelligence elements were spying on our children. They were abusing their power.
The FBI was investigating groups simply because of who the groups were and without any particular practical information about suggesting those groups were unlawful, engaged in unlawful activities or planning unlawful activities.
And that was part of Operation Chaos. It was to disrupt any kind of protest, any kind of argument against the government's policies.
And it was targeting the anti-war movement and those anti-administration journalists, a few of them, that were bugged.
A lot of people became targets of this thing. And this tradition of setting up enemies lists was something that is long in this country's history.
Mail openings was something that I was directly involved in and that I canceled it when I became director.
I don't think an American intelligence service ought to spend much time targeting Americans.
There is a difference between counterintelligence against terrorists and invading the privacy of your citizens.
The agency had done this at the behest of the Johnson administration, and that those who were blaming the agency should have blamed President Johnson and his administration.
The idea of keeping track of your fellow Americans, which seems to be the most fundamentally non-American behavior you can engage in, was something that was practiced and advocated by Hoover, by Van Diemen, and by Nixon. That's what they did. And Richard Nixon firmly believed it and made it part of his policy.
That's the great scandal. Well, I mean, we had a period of law breaking under Nixon. And the CIA was involved in the law breaking.
On June 17, 1972, in the middle of the presidential campaign, 5 men who broke into the Watergate building disguised as plumbers are arrested. The former CIA agents had been sent to inspect Democratic Party headquarters for President Richard Nixon.
Presidential Press Secretary Ron Ziegler today called the incident a third-rate burglary and nothing the president would be concerned with.
4 of the men arrested were Cuban nationals now living in Miami. And the 5th, James McCord, was a former FBI and CIA agent recently employed as a security aide by the Republican National Committee and the Committee to Re-elect the President.
Information began to come out about connections between the CIA and the break-in at the Watergate.
There were a few officers who had retired, who had formerly worked for the CIA, who were involved.
I was appalled at this senseless, illegal action. And I was shocked to learn that employees of the Re-election Committee were apparently among those guilty.
When his own case was involved, he apparently was rather limited because he made some terrible mistakes in defending himself.
Nixon pushes on with his re-election campaign, convinced the Watergate scandal has been hushed up. All the polls put him in the lead by a comfortable margin. But 2 reporters from the Washington Post have Nixon by the throat. The president asks CIA Director Richard Helms to pressure the FBI into dropping its investigation into the Watergate burglary and to cover for him by saying the stolen files were seized at the CIA's request. But Helms refuses.
It's Nixon that was the criminal, not CIA. The CIA refused to cooperate with a cover-up that was ordered by President Nixon.
The CIA was being used by President Nixon to block FBI investigations.
And he wanted the agency to come forward with a signed piece of paper, which I refused to do.
Nixon asked Helms to do it. Helms said no. We will not say that that was a national security issue. We will not be involved in that situation. And Helms then lost his job as a result.
The most popular CIA director was the worst one in terms of policy, was Helms. They loved him, Richard Helms. He was known as the Teflon director because nothing bad ever stuck to him, except Chile.
In 1971, socialist leader Salvador Allende wins the presidential election in Chile. It's too much for Richard Nixon. The horrified U.S. leader gives CIA Director Richard Helms a free hand to prevent Allende from taking office.
This is newspaper talk, newspaper language, carte blanche. how many times do you really get carte blanche? Now, as far as Allende was concerned, Nixon instructed us to try and prevent Allende's access to office.
And the CIA was creating all kinds of chaos in Chilean society, economic and social chaos, to give the military an excuse to step in and overthrow the government.
Nobody talked about killing Allende. It was to try to get him out of office.
But we were associated with people who were willing to kill Allende.
They were using private corporations and the CIA and the military and the embassy. Everything was thrown in. They had a big team working specifically to overthrow Allende.
He was not somebody that the United States government was very fond of.
Henry Kissinger and Richard Helms, the head of the CIA, they were part of the masterminding of this operation in Washington.
And if they felt that Allende was a problem and they wanted us to do something about it, we would do the best we could.
And we tried the best we could.
Washington decides to help Chilean military leaders oust Salvador Allende and put General Pinochet in power. A military coup is finally launched on September 11, 1973. Salvador Allende is assassinated, or according to the CIA, commits suicide. Thousands of Chileans are tortured and killed after the CIA turns over lists of suspects to the junta's death squads.
Even the most experienced CIA officers, people with 20, 30 years experience, do not really understand just how many things the CIA has done in the way of assassination or other covert operations.
Congress is still smarting from being lied to and humiliated by Nixon before he was forced from office. The CIA's role in the coup in Chile, coupled with revelations about the agency's ties to the White House and the Watergate operation, pushed Congress to muzzle the CIA. In 1976, interviews of potential CIA directors by the Church and Pike committees leave Americans stunned. It's a turning point in American political life. Things will never be the same again. Revelations are staggering. The Church report describes the CIA's backing of General Pinochet and its role in ousting Allende's socialist government, greatly tarnishing Secretary of State Henry Kissinger's image.
The attempt of the United States government was not to destabilize or to subvert it, but to keep in, but to keep in being those political parties that had traditionally contested the elections. And our concern was with the election in 1976, and not at all with a coup in 1973 about which we knew nothing.
Henry Kissinger was not enthusiastic about the revelations that the Pike and Church committees made because he came under a lot of criticism for things that he said and did.
Chile was an abuse of American power. It was an abuse by Kissinger, and it was an abuse by the corporations that wanted Kissinger to act on their behalf.
Richard Helms is called to testify. He had never uttered a word in public before, never granted a single interview. The Washington Post would quip that Helms, testifying under oath, came close to perjuring himself on several occasions. Responsible for the wiretaps, Helms had time to destroy all the files before he left the CIA in 1973.
Now, Mr. Helms, in that answer, you used a vague term. Let's try and clarify it. You say you told him about this operation.
Well, I thought so, but maybe I wasn't specific enough about it. I don't know. I thought that this was the general purport of it, and that to get information out of the letters, you would have to open them.
This is an agency that need not obey the law.
The way we were trying to get on with our job, we were
right,
trying
now,
to protect our form of government and our way of life.
Now, I'm trying to find out why a program like this went on for 20 years. It was against the law of the country by every indication we have, statutes, the Constitution, the decisions of the Supreme Court.
Had been producing some information on foreign connections with dissidents and terrorists.
And all I'm trying to find out from you is whether you believe that the CIA doesn't have to abide by these laws because of the problems that the CIA faces?
Well, I think my position, I don't think things are black and white in this life.
You were conscious of the serious question of its legality.
I was, sir.
And nevertheless, you continued to pursue the program. That statement, covert coverage has been discontinued, was a lie. The mail continued to be open. How does a president exercise any control over the CIA or any of these agencies?
I just want to ask one question. Do you know that Mr. Nixon didn't know about that CIA mail intercept operation?
And if he did, there's no one, including you, that have been able to tell us that he did. The president was given a document that did not tell him the truth.
Can't you ask President Nixon whether he knew or not? And I will be guilty as charged.
If you had been the President of the United States and had asked for recommendations coming from a report that was signed by you, the Director of the CIA, what would you believe?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I have to concede that on the record here and without the discussion that went on at the time, it certainly looks that way, and I'm sorry if I made a mistake at that time.
He's the one who used to lie to the presidents. He's the one who lied to Congress. He's the one who tried to keep the thing going. Yet he's the big hero at the CIA.
Richard Helms will go down in the history of CIA as the man who kept the secrets.
And he went to his death with lots of secrets that nobody will ever know about. That's fine. That's what the intelligence system is all about. There are certain things that you're not supposed to see the light of day. And Dick managed to keep a lot of them secret. He was very good.
Former CIA Director William Colby is called and turned to testify before the Senate. They start with questions about the coup in Chile.
The agency make money, they print money. For example, ITT offered the CIA money to destabilize in Chile.
We must rest only on appropriated funds. However, in the process of our operations, we do develop proprietary organizations.
Mr. McCone was involved, and he was involved with the CIA. It kind of indicates that maybe that's not an outrageous request.
Some of our activity along these lines have been generally known for years, and no objection made against them.
Have you ever been briefed on the full extent of CIA's relationships with the mafia? If so, when and with whom?
Colby was the man who finally saw that Frank Church was not going to go away, and he took the transparency route, and it changed forever how CIA is run.
Colby has to field questions about the CIA's expeditious methods and its assassination attempts, both successful and failed, most notably those against Fidel Castro.
Does this pistol fire the dart?
Yes, it does.
What range does it have?
100 meters, I believe, about 100 yards, 100 meters.
Cornered by the senators, Colby agrees to talk about Vietnam and Operation Phoenix.
In effect, this Phoenix program was an assassination program.
Was the objective of eliminating the infrastructure of the VC fully discussed at each briefing?
How many roughly would you estimate were eliminated?
Some 20,000 had been killed by that time.
Like most congressional and presidential commissions, their long-term impact was next to nothing. All of these commissions have not really had an impact because they haven't addressed the mindset, the culture, the character of the people actually doing these operations.
We simply cannot afford to delude ourselves into believing that the Congress, in its ultimate wisdom, can sit up on Capitol Hill and create laws that are going to correct the intelligence agencies.
If you go back and read the Church Committee hearings, you find that everything that the agency did was instigated at the presidential level, including the efforts to eliminate Lumumba, the Bay of Pigs, the various things the agency has been blamed for were instigated at the political level.
Every president that has ever had the CIA do something terrible during their administration has ordered that action to be carried out.
But President Gerald Ford would be the one to give the CIA the final blow. In 1976, he signed an executive order that ended with these words: no employee of the United States government shall engage in or conspire to engage in political assassination.
So we couldn't conduct assassinations or kill anybody. There's a series of executive orders which we were not forced, but we were asked to read and sign.
The reason that Jerry Ford signed the executive order was because it was the time of the church committee, the time of the investigations, and it was a lot of pressure. And he had to say something.
Our legislature and the American people began to believe that you can legislate morality.
It was on the heels of Allende as well as everything else. Gerald Ford looked up and he's president, and he signs the executive order 12033 that says there will be no assassinations, period.
Baloney. They've always done it. If it was in the interest of the United States to assassinate somebody, they would do it.
Every government has used it when necessary. It's nothing special. Assassination is a tool of government, that's all.